Thank you everybody for showing up for this talk. And let me begin introducing my presentation. This actually happens to be a part of a larger study that we are doing together, me and Dr. Sengstock, which is titled Contemporary Family Issues in America. And the contemporary family issues that we thought we would focus on is a big shift from the traditional nuclear family of a breadwinner and a homemaker where mom and dads have two distinct roles, to a switch in rise of binuclear families and blended families, rise in cohabitation. Now all these things are pretty different, or if you would like to call them contradictory to how family was imagined earlier. So if we look back in a time span of about 50 years, these are some of the changes that families have slowly and gradually landed with. So the question here was, are these any aberrations? Are these something that would make the family dysfunctional? Well, yes, if you keep to maintain the traditional focus and definition of the family as to how it should be, then these sound aberrational, these sound or warn us against dysfunctions. But the whole idea was, maybe it's time for us to redefine functionality and then broaden our focus as to how we include these changes as the change of the time. Because institutions evolve over a period of time, and all of you know family is one of the traditional institutions that came into being way back in agricultural times, so we cannot have the same expectations in postmodern times. So for a while I would be debating this, and finally we settled down to get started and collected the data. I would talk about how the data collection happened, but when the data came back, it was about 90 families, and out of those 90 families, about 26, 27 were the families that were recent immigrant families. So all these things that I said were characteristics of change in, if you would like to call mainstream American families, then those 25, 26 families were not actually fitting in because they did not evolve over a period of time under the same influence as all other families. So then I thought I would study them separately and have this title that I have today. And then part of it was I was working with them as an applied sociologist way back in 1998. So from 1998 I kept working with them as an applied sociologist, and then I would design workshops for their mainstreaming. So have worked with them but never thought I would be an applied sociologist until Dr. Sengstock took a look at what I was doing, and she says, oh, this sounds interesting, and this could be something that would make you an applied sociologist, and that's how I got myself a certification, and I work in both fields. Now, giving you the background of what I just gave you, let's get into the methodology of this paper. Well, that's a warning that I might have many more to come for your brown bag series as well in the future. Now, this paper that I'm talking about, which is Stability and Change Among Post-1990 Immigrants, is a paper that just focuses on that, and it is based on those 25 family histories that I said I just got from the data I collected. Now, how did I collect the data? Way back in 2010. Emily, is there a way I can move the slides? Because
yeah, the arrow.
It's not open.
Go forward.
I think it got frozen or something. So in 2010, my students who were my students who were 200 level students, they were doing a family history project. I don't know why students love doing family histories. So after I observed for a while, I said, maybe I should get an HIC approval to do this with the students. And at that time, about 90 students were writing their family histories. And the family history question includes, actually, this is the family history question, that is, describe your family experiences and memories about your immediate family, including your parents, siblings, and extended families, including your grandparents, uncles, and aunts on your mother's and father's side. Try to include as many details as you can about marriages, births, deaths, divorces, religious and ethnic affiliations, education, and employment. Along this, include a description of macro context of what you can recall in terms of what was going on in the society around the time frame you're describing family. Now, this is a purely qualitative way to collect. It's a big open-ended question, and chances are that the students reported what they thought worth reporting and did not tell me what they did not want to, because this has a lot of freedom, but the idea of giving them that freedom was that a free flow of their memories that they would like to report comes to me. Now, this question was actually given to all the students in 2 sections that I taught that semester of the 2000 level course, and that had the same 6 ethnicities that I worked with. So I picked those 24 family histories from those 6 ethnicities, and those were Arabic, Bangladeshi, Bosnians, Chaldeans, Indians, and Pakistanis. And they had moved to United States in a time period not later than 1995, which was actually not that large of a time for them to make adjustments, but it came out to be 4 ethnic families per group, and I tried to analyze them and see what was going on. I'm still working with this, and I can't wait for the term to be over so that I can focus on this. But here are some of the peculiarities of the sample so that you get an idea of who they are, and then we get into the details. Now, when I say an immigrant family, these are the challenges. Some of them might be the challenges that have always been there with our immigrant families, and some of them are new challenges. So let's go over this list. Jumpstart in a new society, establishing economically and socially. So this jumpstart is a term that I would be dealing more in detail with. What do I mean by that? When you're cooking, they say you start from scratch. So this jumpstart is something like that, where you start building your infrastructure in terms of family, not exactly the nuclear family, because most of these people came as a married couple, these children's parents, but to get to know the society, building friendships, establishing yourself in an already established system, and get functional. Now, there is an advantage, if you would like to call, because a considerable percentage of these families that I have been studying comes from parents who already received their degrees somewhere where they're coming from. So it's a jump start, but it's not actually the jump start in this context of a lot of older immigrants when they did not have that kind of a capital. So that was a major challenge this family has, to establish a father who was looking for his own job, a mother who's completely dislocated from the context those families are used to be functioning in collectivist societies. And they were nuclear families, some of them. They were not all extended and joint families. But to be a nuclear family in a collectivist society where you know the culture, the rules and regulations is a complete different experience than being a nuclear family in a society that's completely different in all those contexts. Then adjusting to the structural changes of the family. Structural changes, if you look at the authority in parenting skills and everything, father was very heavily relied on in decision making, in raising kids, in punishing or disciplining the kids. So mothers basically did the nurturance job, and cooking, cleaning, and of course all those things. So mothers could not afford to rely that heavily on those things that they were used to, and there is a change in parenting practices. Now, a change in parenting practices within those 18 years of the children, they were used to be disciplined a certain way, and now there's a big change, then there's a phase of transition. And for these children, it's too much of a difference that dad is not around, and they see mom as a complete different figure in that society who's trying to take over the roles of the dad, and she's getting better at it, but not quite there. Now, lack of role models. Lack of role models is a concept I have used. Now, we can call lack of role models or conflicting role models, if you would like to say, because raising a family without all the experiences one accumulates while growing up under your own parents. So, your parents were smart, they did a good job, and you turned out okay, and you would like to raise your children like that, but the problem here is you cannot do it because the society expects something else. So all the capital of parenting skills that I landed in the society with is doubtful. Am I going to use it as it is, or no, I have to work a little bit before I apply that. So that's a new challenge. And then generation gap. Within a family, the family dynamics becomes a little imbalanced because children are always a generation ahead from their parents' generation, you know that. But in bicultural families, the gap widens faster, because when you come in here and you're learning new things and your children are learning new things, they learn faster than you can. So the generation gap widens, and parents have to make an extra effort to cope with this increased generation gap. That adds to the problems or challenges of parenting in a new society. And then role reversal. Children mature far more earlier, and that's a challenge to the family. You would like them to mature far more earlier, but then they would have a say in everything, which you as a family are not used to. So growing up, I thought my parents were very considerate about how they were raising us, but as a part of the culture, they were supposed to maintain a certain amount of, I would say, not involving children, because, oh, you don't ask the kids. It's your, freedom to implement changes in the family, and the kids would come along. I could not take that as a part of what my parents' privilege already had. Now, multiplicity of norms. When immigrants come here, they're eager to land here, eager to get functional, but little do they realize how hard it would be with multiple frames of references that they would be leading their lives here. Now, part of it is my personal experience. I think I didn't say that, a lot of you know, and that is, I came here, I was a sociologist, a parent, and a spouse. So when we reach here, for a couple years, I wasn't being a sociologist, I was just a parent. And these challenges that I'm talking about and I observed in my sample are some of the challenges I lived firsthand. So what I tell you is something I tried and tested on my own children. It was an 8-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl, and my husband, as soon as we land here, his priority is to establish himself and bounce back into his career, because we made all this change to be successful, and unless he's successful, the rest of the family, our futures were tied to his. So now that multiplicity of norm that I was talking about is, you want your children to succeed, because this group that I was studying, they have a very heavy emphasis on education and doing good at school. But going to school, you all know, is a package deal. you learn so many things in terms of personality development, and academics might be an essential part of it. So these parents were so focused on the academic element and then not bringing any impact to home. So when these children would show other signs of changes, the parents would be very anxious. Do we really want this to come in? Because they did not know how those changes work. They did not grow up here. And that was a very conflicting moment for a husband-wife relationship as well. Mom wants it, dad doesn't. Mom's family grew up here and she's well versed with this culture, or she's exposed to this culture. Dad does not have any connection. So that kind of a change in the family dynamics due to the multiplicity of norms. And the concept of parallel socialization. This concept of parallel socialization I have used for my workshops that were published in Mary Kay Sengstock's book, The Voices of Diversity. But the concept is, this is how it works. It's a process of dual socialization that occurs in an environment of cultural inconsistency between home and school, involving two different simultaneous processes of learning, at both places with dual sets of expectations and no role models. So basically, if I break it down to a layman's term, kids lived in two different worlds, 8 to 3 and then 3 to 8 next morning. That was bringing in some kind of pressures for the family because parents did not know what that other world was. Okay, so with these are some of the key concepts that I'm thinking I would be using for this paper, but I'm still in the formative stage, and I'm open to suggestions. If you have any after my presentation, please feel free to do that. Now with this, there is an important element of who these people are in terms of a larger immigrant population, and it turns out that most of them were on H-1B visas. Now, immigrants are immigrants, but the fact that what visa you show up here matters a lot, because that tells you a profile of your education, employment, where you are coming from and where you are headed to, and that makes a lot of difference. With that, there's another thing which makes this immigration different, that is the post-digital era immigration. What do I mean by post-digital? Not the era, but the post-digital revolution I would like to talk about. Faster means of transport and communication with the click of an internet, how people can find out what's going on anywhere in the world. So when you talk about these immigrant families, that was a very important reason for a cultural continuity that they were maintaining from the societies they were migrating. And this factor of continuous cultural continuity is something that would make them different from the immigrants of the past. Well, I was talking to Dr. Sengstock last night, and she came up with an example that how one of her Middle Eastern students who take a PhD here, and she is in the committee, and right after she goes and announces and congratulates her, her husband picks up the phone and is telling everybody wherever she's from that she has a doctorate. Now she's a doctor so-and-so. Well, you know how news travels. So in this era, there would be a cultural continuity, and that would make these people a lot different in terms of absorbing culture. There is no doubt that they would absorb culture, but that absorbed culture would always be mixed, matched with the culture that's already going to be there for a longer time. The easiest way to find out how people stay multicultural longer, any neighborhood you live, drive around and see the dish antennas. The dish antennas of a television tell me a lot of the story I gave you in so many words. That is, there is a bicultural family living here, and they are being connected to the other part of, no matter where they are from. So there is another culture that's penetrating their living rooms every day. And they also have this confidence of showing up here with a certain amount of education and starting here. So with all this put together, assimilation is going to be there, but that assimilation is going to be more often acculturation, because there's an initial culture in which everything else would get deposited. So there would be two worlds they would be maintaining in being a part of the mainstream. Now, with that said, the observation was these kids have or I would do that in my early inferences. Let's focus on the theoretical framework. Now, coming to a theoretical framework, I was looking at my sample from these perspectives. First, as the structural functionalist perspective, a pretty old perspective, but the immigrants woven into their social fabric of the society they were living. They tear themselves apart from that social fabric. They land into a new social fabric, and they need to be rewoven into that fabric. Now, if something tears and you're trying to fix that, it shows up. There's a patch. Well, how efficiently you can hide the patch, that's your skill. So that's basically what was happening, that they would be patched into an already established society. And since I'm studying them, within 15 years of their immigration, they are way different. Maybe these changes would be different if I studied them half a century later, when these patches become invisible and they are more efficiently woven into the mainstream. Looking from the symbolic interactions perspective, I have used these two theories to do my applied thing, which was the workshops. I was designing the workshops in this theoretical background, although I wasn't talking to them in this, and this paper gives me a chance to talk about that. First was the theory Mead has in terms of self, and how he breaks self into an I and a me. And I is a subjective part of us, each human being, human self, and me is that objective part. And me is that part of human self that interacts with the society around, whereas I is pretty secure. So me does a fine-tuning as to how I perceives itself. Now, looking at these people, their I's and me's were formed in that society wherever they're coming from. And then when they come here, I is intact inside, and it's the me struggling to tune the I. The fine-tuning gets harder, and that is an indication of family pressures an immigrant family would have. Slowly and gradually, it eases out, and I and me start working more coordinatingly, but it's a matter of time. And the more differences are in terms of culture, education, religious beliefs, the more harder the I and me struggle would be. Then another theory that I would be using is Cooley's looking glass theory. And this looking glass theory talks about how society acts as a mirror in terms of reflecting back who we are or how we are being perceived, and getting a social image we fix ourselves. So they were used to looking at themselves in another looking glass, which was the other society, and that told them, oh, you have all the equipment to raise a family as an adult. Now you come here, and now the looking glass you have, that is the larger society, and it says, maybe your looking glass has changed and you need to change. So there is a conflict. So these people have two looking glasses as time goes by. One is the looking glass of their own community culture that they might surround themselves into, but they know that this is going to change as our comfort zone broadens, and then they would be comfortable more and more to look into the looking glass, which is the mainstream society. So that is the struggle which immigrant families are going through. Now, I would call some of the things that I have listed in my next slide as early inferences, because I just said I was working with them and I'm not done to tell you the actual findings. And here are some of the early inferences. Fathers played a leading role. Now, you would say, oh, all fathers played the leading role. But this means a lot to me when I started my presentation saying I was looking for the changes in the traditional family. Now, a family as an institution has two sub-institutions, fatherhood and motherhood. So from the fact that we are having more single-parent families, blended families, bi-nuclear families, the role of fathers is being challenged. And some family sociologists worry that fatherhood institution is declining. So with that mindset, when I sit down to work with this sample of 24 families, I see, no, father is up there. He's still playing the key role, and the fatherhood institution is very heavily being relied upon. Part of it, yes, families are patriarchal, and it's his H-1B visa on which the whole family is here, and he spearheads the whole family into the society, and he continues to play that role for a longer time. And, you know, education and entrepreneurship are two important channels that are trusted and strived for. So they're either relying on those careers that bring in a lot of income. So the parents are focusing on children to do really, really good at school. And then entrepreneurship in those cases where they know their educational skills are not something that would put them in a high income bracket, then they get into businesses that would raise their earnings. Now, children were expected to do more, to be more successful than their parents as they were growing up in the land of opportunities. This is a constant pressure that has resounded in those family histories, because the parents were making sure that you go into professional courses and come out with good scores and find yourself good, meaning high-paying jobs. So anything that would not assure a well-paying job was a big no-no in those families, and that added a lot of pressure on these children, because if these children would have been raised there, you'll find that being those societies with lesser opportunities, maybe it's everybody's focus, and children might have not felt it that way. But when they go to school with children who are a little bit relaxed and laid back and have other emphasis in their lives as well, which is recreation and extracurricular activities, these kids feel pretty pressured. Now, when it comes to the gender roles, women who are taking up the male roles as compared, when it comes to changing gender roles, women were more taking up the male roles as compared to men who were rather slow in giving up their privileges. Well, this is a story in all families. Men have had that privilege of having those gender roles that they really like maybe for a while, and it's a hard transition. But here, the pressure on women is way different than what the pressure used to be there, because a lot of domestic help and the expectation that you were not just the breadwinner or the financial provider, but you would take care of a lot of things that need to be done, like parent-teacher meetings, banking, taking kids to doctors, now have switched as a mother's responsibility, but at the same time, running a household, cooking, cleaning, doing domestic chores are still her responsibility. So she is switching to an American woman's role, if you would like to call, by doing all this, but she still has to make sure that there are 2 meals cooked every day and waiting for her husband when he gets back. Well, that's the harder part. Now, out of 24, I think about 20 students said that their mothers have higher qualifications to be out in the occupational sphere, professional sphere to find jobs, but they had to hold back and let their husbands establish while they were raising their children. And to me, it's a tremendous waste of human capital. But they are holding on to their roles as homemakers while their husbands establish, and then the next emphasis is on children doing well. So once the kids start schooling and they're well settled in the school and are of an age that they don't need childcare or anything, that's when women start to look for jobs. But in some cases it's too late. You cannot give that kind of a job. So I think that's about it. Okay. While you are asking questions, I see a lot of my students, and some of these students I would like to introduce are exchange students who are from Oman, and they are in United States for this semester, and they drove all the way. I don't think they drove, they got a cab to get them here for the lecture. Would you raise your hands, the three of you? Oh, they're coming from Rio Grande. I said I would give you attendance points, so I'm circulating this, my students. This is the usual thing you do for my class, right? So just sign up. Okay, you are now free to ask questions. Okay.
What was the significance of 1995?
Why 1995? One of that was personal because I am a post-1995 immigrant. But when I started looking around, there were more people coming around that time than before who were highly qualified, especially into technology and medicine. Actually, this should have been 1965 because that's when our Immigration Act changed and it opened up. But between 1965 and 95, there was immigration, but it wasn't as massive of technologically trained manpower as it was around this time.
I thought your talk was very interesting. And one thing that if you haven't considered that might be helpful is to, when delineating your theory, is to incorporate some of Du Bois's work. It's a Du Boisian concept of dual consciousness and self created through a veil. I think that would be very applicable in this particular.
Thank you for that suggestion. I would note that down. And I was looking for theories. I'm not done with the theoretical framework, but that helps.
Because a lot of these, the immigrant experience, it seems to me, would parallel the black experience as well, especially the Jim Crow era and prior to that. So it's basically, its whole theory is that the self is created along two separate spheres. One self is created and reflecting through one's involvement with the black community, and then the other one's reflected through their involvement with the hostile white community. So it's I think it'd work good,
Yes.
potentially.
I'm glad you had that suggestion, and I would make sure I look into it. Here's one more thing. I think I said this immigration is different. This immigration is more of the colored people of the world coming in. So this concept of being colored, being immigrant is different than coming from Europe. Now when I say coming from Europe, it sounds that all Europeans were Europeans and had no problems. Students that are here, if you have older grandparents, go talk to them and they'll tell you how big of a problem we used to have within different white populations of Europe because of the cultural reasons, religious reasons, how they were not seen as a one group. If it was that bad then, it's, I would say, worse because these people look different and they would continue to look different. When I teach my class in terms of race and problems of race, there's one big W that I often use, and my students would agree, and that is the big W that signifies white of today, which, if you go back, has input from all different immigrants turning into that big W. Now, looking at this immigrants, they are never going to be a part of one big letter when it comes to color. There would be a rainbow of colors because of the diversity they are coming in. And then one more thing that is important is the connection to the old culture is going to make them stay with what they have. And that's why we'll wait and see how this change unravels, where race remains an essential part. Even if they mainstream, they're going to look different, and they would constantly have certain inputs from their cultures back. Because in our melting pot era, by the third generation, language and culture was considered to be restricted to your private sphere. If you are a patriotic American, English is something that ties you more to everybody else than practicing your local European cultures. And that spirit let them go away, their old culture. I would like to see how this affects. Yes, go ahead.
I want to like, have you like taken into account the locations of these families, like where they're living right now? Because I mean, as an immigrant, like I mean, as a family of an immigrant family who came in post-90, who came in like 1998, I lived like when I first came here, I lived in an area where there was a very small minority population. I live in a predominantly white society. But then it was like, once I came to Michigan, it was a much more different experience for me personally. So have you taken that into account?
Yes, the family histories tell me where their journey began in the United States. So most of them, at the time that when they were reporting this, live in different suburbs of Detroit, Troy, Sterling Heights, Canton, Bloomfield Hills. These are some of the ones that are coming off the top of my head. And some of them said that they did begin in the inner city, but they were there for a very short time till they could find a house, and then they moved, and then they built their house. So yes, if you're asking me where do they live, most of them lived in the suburbs. There were very few who would give me this address.
If I could chime in on that, the Immigration Service has, upon occasion, especially at different times, deliberately placed new immigrants in places where there weren't very many people of that group, because they thought it would integrate them more quickly into society, which any of us who know anything about acculturation and assimilation know that that's wrong.
Yeah.
It's just the opposite. If they have the support of the community, it works better. But they have deliberately done that.
They could deliberately do that and accelerate integration or assimilation. Now the problem is, these people come here with their job visas, and they would choose where they want to live. So that's another worry that I have in terms of retaining their culture. If they choose, then they would retain their culture. That was a pressure which I wouldn't say I would like, but I would say that's a pressure that told them to broaden their comfort zone as quickly as they can to integrate. Plus, see, our suburbs are basically divided on classes. You tell me your address and I would basically process your position in the hierarchy of income. So since they make that kind of money, they're looking for houses in those suburbs, and they can afford to buy. So that pink suburbs are not pink anymore, they're getting colored because of these immigration issues. Did you sign? Did everybody sign? Okay. Yes, go ahead. You didn't sign, okay, I'll meet you and I'll make you sign. Go ahead.
The concept of multiplicity of norms, if I'm understanding that correctly, that's the construct used to capture the observation that children are learning different norms than the parents through school and home, that the parents are not aware of the norms being acquired through school, correct? What concept am I thinking about to
In
describe
multiplicity of norms?
that? Yeah, is that it?
Multiplicity of norms is something that applies to different generations differently.
Right.
Like multiplicity of norms applies to me. I'm an adult, but when I show up at work, it's a different place, and I work with different norms.
Okay.
My home is, to a certain extent, structured on the norms I had there, but there is a change based on the changes me, my husband, and kids have constantly been bringing into home in last 15 years. So that's a different change. But for adults, when I see multiplicity of norms, for children, when I see multiplicity of norms, they are in very formative stages. So they have to learn the rules, and they learn the rules from what their teachers say is right to function around, and what their parents say is right to function around, and they do a good mixing and matching. These kids are really crafty kids, which includes my own kids, because they know they have to please two sets of adults. And at that age of 9, 10 years, when you're trying to be a good girl or a good boy at home and at school, well, a lot of them do it. But there can be some people whom I did not meet in my samples of family histories. I'm sure they're there, who were not able to use those two pressures the same way, and they missed the boat out.
So that was kind of my question. So is there any evidence that this multiplicity of norms results in an increased familial conflict because the children are trying to basically conform and assimilate to the culture they're acquiring through school? If parents are adhering to their culture of origin, is there any evidence that these clash in the home?
From the histories, the major clash was picking their mates. So if you listen from the parents' perspective, oh, we're not asking you to marry whom we want you to marry, you can pick your mate. But make sure you look into these restrictions, and most of the time it's the community. So the change here is, if those were Hindu students, they say, my parents said pick a person from India who's a Hindu, and that's okay. Caste we would reconcile. It's hard to, but we would give it. But if it's a Muslim parent, they would say, okay, you can marry anybody Muslim, not exactly from where we are. So that's the settlement that the two are agreeing upon. But what if happens that the kids go beyond the broad boundaries that you have given them as a freedom? They want more freedom. Yes, there are frictions. And issues of dating. Then there is a relative difference in how much freedom the male students reported as compared to female students reported. So there are the clashes, and that adds to the pressures of immigrant families. Yes?
How would you compare this new wave of immigration in the 1990s to that of like the late 1800s, like a century ago, when we were just coming out of the Industrial Revolution, and now we're kind of in the post-industrial era, where it's switching more to technology?
The era that you're talking about historically and the influxes then, the simplest way would be to talk about is, that was a one-way ticket. People got on a ship and they knew they were going to be here, and they were going to be here for good. And as we were talking yesterday, a letter took 3 months to get there to tell them that somebody died here. And then another 3 months to get the condolences from that society. Eventually, relationships died. As compared to now, well, everything is fast, and some of them come here with the mindset that they might go back. And it does happen. And then a lot of these are transnational families. So the 1820s, if you want to have the reference point, then the whole family was in Italy or Germany, wherever, and this was a family here. But today, these kids said they have an aunt in England, an uncle in Canada. The third uncle was planning to come and follow them in the United States, and they have their whole family in Bangladesh or India. So these are pretty scattered families. And it's interesting, they still call themselves a family. And they have family reunions where people fly from different continents and meet in one place. This never happened then. Yes.
What did you mean by role reversal, challenges of an immigrant?
Role reversal, children are adults sometimes. And especially when it comes to learning new things, I was telling them that kids learn faster than the parents. So they would come back and tell you, look, this is what it means. And then you are like, oh, okay. But then you want to go back and be a parent. So it's hard to be a parent. When you are a parent, you follow them. When my parents were parenting, I was following them. They never came to me to help. But I often go to